I'm going to welcome next our good friend, Dr. Victor Simon, who's a superintendent in Gower School District number 62 in Illinois. So we're going to be talking about new leadership with you. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Simon.
Hey, thank you. Not seeing my camera here quite yet, but
I see your camera.
all
Yeah,
right,
you're
great.
on.
Yeah, I'm all set then.
Yeah, you're all set. Okay, great. Well, you got to listen in on some of what we were talking about, the EduJedi I've worked on so far. So I want to ask you about that. What's your take on sort of the next level of where schools have to go?
Yeah, listen, I could have listened for another half an hour easily there to get the rest of those slides from Chris. We haven't had a chance to meet personally, but just here over the screen, listening to some of the ways to essentially try to effectuate, what we're going to do. I love this conversation about trying to automate some of the processes and whatnot, but how do we get to the point of where it's really going to have this impact or to effectuate it, so to speak? And it's helpful for me from a leadership role to hear about and share with others when we start to think about there's the stuff, in this model that we just went through, like there's the stuff, the things to think about. Then you have to really think through designing the experience itself. And then finally, when you get to this idea of programming and really trying to put all the pieces together, what I really loved hearing too at the end there was, hey, listen, this conversation is going to be happening for a while, and I'm glad to hear that because it does give us some space where, as school leaders, generally speaking, it's been quite a run, these last 18 to 20 months. And when we think about what's going to be happening next, there is the growing pressure of we're pivoting from we're getting closer and closer to certainly a post-crisis. I wouldn't go far enough to say post-COVID, but certainly pivoting into a post-crisis. And I think at that stage for organizations is when we start to think, if we've, to borrow a phrase from Chris earlier, is like, if we start to look at the findings from turning over some of these rocks in the organization, so to speak, it's at this point now that we're starting to catch our breath and starting to look back at what the new normal is, that we should start to see at least a leading indication of what's important to us, what have we put into place, what has started to change, and things of that nature. Where did we leverage resources? What are the conversations about? So, overall, just to answer it briefly, it's great to hear it. And, certainly headed in the right direction. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. Well, you've been through a lot there. What do you want to give us an overview kind of what's been happening with you?
Yeah, I mean, so COVID for everybody, right? I mean, that's just something for every organization across sectors has had an impact. And, just fascinating if you had a chance to listen in on the FDA committee yesterday, talking about elementary age or 5 to 11 vaccines, Pfizer and whatnot. Some of the conversation that they gave, the committee members talking about and justifying their vote for it, brought up schools and brought up school environments. Not in every single case, but I think there was 17 or 18 votes yesterday. I would say probably half of them talked about the impact of school closures and the impact this has all had on schools and whatnot. So it's just that we're seeing these policy lines and these areas really have crossed in so many ways and blended that, so yeah, that's a big part of what we've had been dealing with for a long time. But I'm a person that likes to look forward and move forward. But in DuPage County here in Illinois, we were open all of last school year, which was not common, for our area. It was a challenge, and new things have happened. We've come back in ways to flex our school nursing program and our resources for the community. Certainly, one of the first in the state to do e-learning in replacement for what we would call a traditional snow day or an emergency day.
Yeah.
That feels kind of like old news now, but we were the first to officially do that by policy here in the state, and now have adopted a full-on remote educational program for those families. When we talk about individualization and whatnot for students, might work better for them. So we want to make sure that that's been memorialized as we come out of crises and get back to what we want to call new normal, what things have changed. So yeah, that's what the conversation has been about here for us over the last couple of years, and reminding everybody what leadership is required to do the things that we want to do, to bring about the changes that we want to bring. It's not easy work, so I'd be happy to share a couple slides with you all and keep the conversation going. It's however you'd like to
Yeah, go ahead. I'm going to go off camera so the attention's on you. But I'll stay on and make sure if I need to bring up anybody doing Q&A with you, I do that.
Yeah, great. Let me get the screen going here.
Great. Okay, good. All right, we see it.
Yeah, just a title slide here. Let me get started into a couple of these and just reorganize my desktop while we're still having our conversation going. See you all on the same screen as I'm on. You know, we talked about the environment. We talked about the system in this last section, and it reminds me of this quote. Deming quote goes back quite a bit, but the system is designed perfectly to get the results it's designed to get, right? Like whatever we decide, the system or the environment that we serve in is going to be built to do. We shouldn't be too surprised if those are the results we get. I don't know if this adds pressure to leaders or takes it away. For me, it is something that's motivational in the sense of we have an impact on that. You know, the conversations we have with those that we put in the right places and so on. Essentially that model to try to bring all the bits and pieces to a point that they can be programmed. You know, this quote just rings true. So it oldie but goodie, but something it's important to remind everyone of. This one's pretty text heavy, but the reason I put it up here, and I'll be sure to share the slide deck with you as well, but the reason I put it up here is a colleague of mine in a nearby school district, Dr. Paul O'Malley, I think you guys heard from him a little bit yesterday. We had a lot of involvement with the state level in terms of trying to put some of these programming places, policies and procedures into place for colleagues across. And this was a quote that we're proud of. And when it talks about COVID in terms of a crisis, you know, that we all know now. But this idea of having the opportunity to emerge stronger, what a great time to not only remind people, I mean, our plates are full, you know, collectively speaking here, but generally we're at that stage now. You know, and if we haven't started to put some of that into place months ago, I worry that you could fall at risk of falling behind now. And that means we have the opportunity to emerge stronger. It's not business as usual. So when we are back to quote normal, so to speak, you know, what have we done different? And it's some accountability on that. And you know, so I appreciate that one. And then when we talk about leveraging technology here, this comes from that lessons document that our state has given to administrators. I think it was pretty forward thinking. But this quote from Maxwell here about change being inevitable and growth being optional also rings true in today's day when we're starting to think about the work that could have been done, the work that maybe should have been done. We're starting to see maybe the deck be cleared just a bit for us to hold organizations to account in the sense of have we taken those steps to build what we want to call the new normal. So, you know, if schools look differently, you know, they should. and we do want to keep that perspective in mind. So this was just an important lesson. It does say lesson number 4. I wasn't intending to go through all the 10 lessons that our state has shared, and we've been involved with them in helping put together. But this one I thought was the most relevant to bring to the group here. And there's a second component to it. And I really like this last sentence. If in 5 years things are relatively the same, I mean, we've really not only missed a huge opportunity, but, you know, dare I say that we get into this world of, you know, this could be viewed as a failure then. You know, if in 5 years things are relatively the same as they had been prior to or during even this pandemic stage or phase, you know, we've missed the opportunity to do what we would want to have in place in our classrooms at the organizational level, which is this adaptive change. So this is an opportunity. I know there's quotes out there that talk about, you know, a crisis going to waste and all that kind of stuff, you know, and that can be viewed as insensitive. And that's not the vein in which I approach the work from by any means. But typically when we do face a crisis, that's when the status quo is held to account, right? It's challenged, it's softened up a bit, and the ability to turn over rocks and see things from a different perspective, that all emerges. So it is a real opportunity to build in what we would say is long-lasting change, or that deep structure type of work that leaders are involved in. Not to say that's easy by any means, but you asked earlier what I've kind of been up to. This is the way we've been putting the work together, and just reminding folks that this is the time right now. We're at risk of maybe missing an opportunity. I'm going to put this quote up here and pause and see if any questions from you or comments that you'd like to, to ask here. But generally speaking, we have to be reminded that all the strategy work, super important. I love all the models. I love to be able to identify what's there and evaluate it in the end, see what's going to be terminated and continued and all the rest, that important work. But we do have to be reminded that at least, this Drucker quote here, the only thing I would edit about it is not only does culture eat strategy for breakfast, but it's probably, lunch and dinner as well. Without that culture in place, I don't know how effective the strategy can be. A lot of spinning wheels that happen when we talk about the things and the tools and the process if we don't have the right culture in place, not only to accept it, but to get behind it and move it forward, right? So let me pause there, LeiLani, and see if you have any questions or comments before I continue on.
I think this is really there's a lot of depth to this. And I know that politically we shouldn't be talking about all the different ways culture is eating strategy for breakfast, but it is. And we are seeing it nationally as Learning Council. But I want to just stress on something that I think is really, the beautiful part of it is that everywhere we go and everyone we're talking to, people are stepping up. I mean, the administrations of every school every district that we talk to they're stepping up and they're being highly flexible and doing, minor miracles daily. I mean, we just met a Indianapolis superintendent where she needs 101 bus drivers, she said. She has 84. She had to move food service people into driving buses. So now the kids only get salami sandwiches or peanut butter and jelly because they don't have time to do warm meals. But every day she gets out of bed, it's like, are we going to be in school, or did I lose one person, therefore I have to shut down all the busing because of equity? I can't just bus some of the kids. She's riding a roller coaster every single day, and yet she had a smile on her face. Yeah. And she was chipper about the whole thing. That's what we really have to focus on, is the fact that we have minor miracles every day happening because people step up. Like you're there.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, and credit to my colleague out there in Indianapolis that's right there in the middle of the work as well, right? And questioning these kind of things and trying to consider equity and equality in the sense of the work that we do when the challenge is great, right? So then the culture could be, when we talk, whether it's national politics, regional, local, certainly it all comes down to local politics. But when we think about just within our school system, just one particular classroom, the culture is going to be there, right? Like, so these classroom cultures build up into grade levels, build up into hallways and sections of schools, and then the whole school and the district and so on. So, the strategy is super important. Culture is just going to prevent that strategy from really, in the end, being effectuated if we don't have it in place. So I'm really motivated to share with leaders what are some of the things that we could think about. How do we make sure we have those skill sets in place? And if we don't, where can we go to think about and sort of like contextualize the work in a way that's helpful for us as leaders? And that's what I remind people of. Is like, this culture is going to exist in a classroom, your school, your district, like wherever, whatever level of the organization you want to look at. So let's say with a classroom, that culture exists with or without the teacher's hands on the wheel, so to speak, right? That proverbial wheel. If the teacher's hands are on it or not, the culture will come to be. So it's just smart, right? I mean, and ultimately it's effective to steer the ship. And now, of course, you got to hold on real tight. Same thing to be said about a school, or as you have referenced the superintendent in Indianapolis, the district. So really being right there, at the front line with some of these issues, whether it's food service and bus driving in one example, or it's trying to figure out what level of automation are we going to do to take student performance data and try to find a way to automate that into programming opportunities for students at the classroom level or experience for lessons and whatnot. So, I mean, it's a wide spectrum here to do that work. This is the framework that I believe in. And this is the one that for me personally and several others that have shared this work with and have built up through, it's these 5. And when I put the or bust on there, it does get people's attention in the sense of if something isn't going right, I do have a strong suspicion that it's going to end up being in one of these places. We talk about evaluating programs. If we take a one step up and look at evaluating like the leadership behind some of these programs, this is what I'm going to be looking for. Relationships are bust. If you don't have the relationships, it's going to be very difficult to continue to move forward with individuals, trying to convince them of something that should change from their current practice if you don't have that relationship in place. So when we say or bust, here's what I don't know. And I think that's the beauty of the work is like we don't know when that bust occurs. And I don't want to create a sense of paranoia for leaders, but at the same rate, we all do understand the impact we have and the power behind the decisions that are made in some instances, the power that they can have on a community. So I don't know when the bust occurs, but if you don't have relationships, it can be very quickly, in your face saying like, something's not working, or it could take a little while. But at one level or another, that has to be there. Same with communication. We have a great plan. We don't get that communication out there with whoever's involved in terms of stakeholder groups. That could lead to the bust. When we talk about the political frame, I meet leaders often that tell me, and teachers are the same way. And I don't think that this model it should be something that's strange to teachers either. I think this is the same for them in a classroom. But political frame, people say, well, I don't do this for politics. There's no politics here. I do this just straightforward. I don't get involved. The problem with that is that I think there might be just kind of thinking about politics or the political frame, borrowing from Bowman and Deal as authors here for the political frame, but it's really just a sense of competing interests, right? Competing agendas, competing priorities, and how to manage that with limited resources. So if we put this back into the digital transition world and say, okay, well, the political frame, if we don't understand where, for instance, if there's a teachers union involved, if we don't understand what the goals are there, what their interests are, what their readiness is, what their agenda might be, I don't know that we'd be able to balance out that need and find sort of a strike point to be able to get the work done. So that's what I mean by the political frame. Deep roots, it can be viewed in a couple of different ways. It's being involved in the community in lots of different ways, of course, is super helpful. I think of that as more relationships and more about visibility. When I talk about deep roots, I'm talking about you personally as a leader. What do you stand for? What's important? Can you sort of hold the line, do the buffering work that when the community does see something a little bit different than maybe the teachers are seeing or a principal or what have you? Where are you pulling from to kind of hold that line and continue moving on forward with what's important? The analogy I use here is, when we talk about a tree with deep roots really doesn't have to fear a stiff wind is an old proverb, but the idea behind it is you talk to leaders that'll say things, but saying and doing, that's a big space for some. And we're trying to close that space down. What we're saying, what we believe, and then what we actually end up doing, we want that space to be pretty tight, right? That overlap is what we want. It's how we build trust. That's how it overlaps with these other elements of the framework. And then finally, I don't know if it's more of a Midwestern piece or not, certainly, but this idea of staying humble and hungry or bust. And it wasn't that I didn't think to split this in two and try to keep it to 5 bullets and not 6. Humble and hungry being together is purposeful. So this idea about being ambitious for the organization, about being ambitious to move the organization forward in terms of whether it's digital transition, bringing in new resources, what have you, that's where that hunger part comes from. We still want to do all that work. We can do that with a high level of humility. And that's essentially it, right? That's the framework. If someone asks, what does it take to be an effective leader? This is the secret set of ingredients that are not so secret anymore on this page. That's it. And now in a short amount of time that we have, we could say a lot more about each one of these. But I think just to be reminded of it with so much that we've done in the last couple of years and certainly challenges before that, but more so in these last couple of years with new expectations about, we hear the phrase, new normal, new normal, new normal. Well, what are we finding with families? What are we finding with students? What are we finding with teachers in the sense of what we know might be more effective? And are we going to dare take that extra step to make that happen? Whether it's a remote learning world like we've been offering here, whether that's remote classes, that is more of that hybrid approach. Whichever one it's going to be, it has to work in your local community. And for that leadership framework to move forward through this set of 5 year, otherwise the work just doesn't get done, is what we find. It just doesn't happen. We end up talking about it, and it just doesn't get done. So I think it's a good place to pause again and see if you have any questions or comments here before I, finish up our conversation today.
Well, I'm checking for questions. I don't see any raised hands, but what I really like that you're saying, it's kind of a breath of fresh air, actually, Victor. I should turn my camera on because otherwise I'm just like a disembodied voice.
Thanks.
You are saying here, stay humble, stay hungry. That's what we really want to hear, just based on our national research from every superintendent, because the truth is, the politics, the things going on are causing a mass attrition. There's a lot of parents that are like, I'm out, not doing it, not going to do that with my child. I'm out. And they were also exposed during the pandemic to every other alternative thing. They were all surfing around, they were finding different things. This is a massive change. And you have to be competitive now. You have to be as flexible as you're talking about. Some kids learn way better remote, and other kids kind of curled up in a ball because they're little social animals and they can't learn without the social framework. So it's how do you become a mixologist of those things to appeal to everyone, disaggregate your service offerings, provide the human intersection where needed. So you're not like some of the online software companies just got beat up hard in the last couple of months because they were like, yeah, we have, chat bots that'll help the kid, and they never had anybody on there. Didn't respond for 36 hours. Like, that's not going to work for your math learning. Hello. So there's a lot going on, right? So
That's right.
It's a viewpoint thing, right? Like your leadership viewpoint, I wish I could cookie cutter it to all the other superintendents we know.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And we think about how long schools, public schools in particular, but schools in general, have been in a national spotlight around everything from whether it's like masking policies and COVID-related mitigation work, or then now with this sort of, it's transitioned more into, like parent choice and voice conversations and homeschooling, right? Like that's become sort of like this, there's been a bigger push for that, right? And so when we start to think about, well, what does that mean for us as a school trying to have service orientation as our leading, move, right? Like that's our first step. So I think about, all right, I put this in a perspective of something that's very, straightforward. And it was when COVID hit and we started to look, and maybe it's a bit of my science background or what have you, but I just have an affinity for, all right, we're going to test our way through this. Like we similar to what Chris said earlier, like we let's get a lay of the land. Like, what do we know we have? Let's get a mapping of what this environment is before we start to talk about what needs to change and all the rest. So we did not have the ability to test on site. We were one of the first in the country to be able to test on site. I've had a chance to, to present on this state, national level and whatnot about what does it look like to go and do COVID testing in our schools on site with our staff. We started doing that in the fall of 2020, not the fall of 2021. We're still doing it now, of course, but we're more experienced than as much as anyone. I don't say that it's a humble brag, I guess, but the idea behind it is because we wanted to open that up to the entire community. Mm-hmm. So you fast forward, and what that looks like now you have families making decisions based on the resource they have available to them through us in our health office. So a good example is this one. Family comes through and they say, hey, we experienced a loss in our family. Someone had passed away. Sad case. And they told us that we had family coming from out of town. All right, it's a few months back. Family coming in from out of town. Could they come and test? We want to do the right thing. We want to make sure everyone's doing what they can. The fact that we were able to have that available to them, not only was it great to do, and the answer, of course, was yes, and everything worked out fine. But the fact that had to get put into motion 10 months, 12 months prior is what I think about in the sense of what does that mean in terms of when we return for students and their learning? Like, so what can we put into place now so we're not just going to turn this away? I mean, I have colleagues that had their schools closed the whole time. I don't mean that negatively for last year at all, that was their environment. They were closed the whole time, and it's not safe to be here. And remote was the only option. Now that schools in Illinois, this is just one state here, of course, but like schools have the ability to create policy to allow for remote learning in a formal sense, right? A student applies for it through their family, as you had said, that's the better mode for them. We can allow that, but we have to take the actual formal step to make it happen. And it bothers me a lot to see how few. There was an article printed probably about a month or so old now, but at that time, over 800 districts in our state. I believe the number was like 10. And we were I think we were the actual first to do that as well. But very few had formalized a remote educational program, despite a year's worth of trying to find out whether or not, even if it's good for a small handful of students, which is what it is, it's for us, it's a few percentage points of students. That was enough for us to make sure it was still here, So that's the hunger part that I'm talking about. Yeah, just thank you for listening. To kind of glance over the clock. I don't want to take up any more of the time. I know we have a full panel to get into.
I think we have a couple of minutes left.
Great. So
and then we're gonna take a short break and see you again on the panel. I just want to have final comments from you then on, becoming the homeschool option yourself, right? Like, because that's what Lammersville IC in California did.
Yes.
They said, you know what, we get it. We still love you, even though you don't want to be here. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, so that is exactly right. And when we provide the programming or the experience, whether or not that becomes the parent wanting that as the app. Now, maybe a pure homeschool, like traditional homeschooling is what they're saying they want for a variety of reasons. But without being able to meet in the middle to what you had just kind of laid out, is like, what if we were that option for them? We still have a hand in the progress for that student academically, educationally. So we've created what they're called informally liaisons, right? These are teacher liaisons that if you are truly going to be in this remote environment, we don't want to risk you detached from us, right? As you had just said, I think that's the best one. It's like, hey, we still love you and care about you. That relationship's important. If I had to boil this framework down to one thing, actually, let me do it this way. 3 things, it would be these: relationships, relationships, relationships. Like, that would be it. So if someone tells us that this isn't the right setting, the brick and mortar behind me kind of stuff, then that's okay. We're not offended, So we have to be able to be that option for them and create those new spaces that are sure to not only be here for the long haul, but continue. Otherwise, we're behind, right?
Yeah.
So.
And maybe marginalized for an increasing percentage of students, right? That would leave you, and then you're marginalized.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so very smart position to take. Well, thank you. Well, we're going to pelt you with more questions when you come on the panel.
Okay.
But I'm going to give you, your 15-minute or so break right now, and then have you right back on.